Penn State drops a tough one in the Peach Bowl after losing several guys to opt-outs and injuries. All I can say after this is bring on the offseason. For the last time in the 2023 season, Tim Aiden, Patrick Herbert from BlackShoeDiaries.com. Pat, I know we talked briefly before we went live, and you're not. I noticed you weren't sad or shirtless because, frankly, just games like these, they feel more and more like glorified exhibition these days. Just given all the opt outs that tend to happen, and also when you're playing with when you got interim coordinators on both sides of the ball. I mean, how seriously can you take a game like this?
Yeah, I mean, it always depends upon the context of the game, right? Like last year, I think the Rose Bowl had a little bit more juice to it. Penn State, but it's just Joey Porter Jr. that opted out, I think, from Penn State side of things, unless I'm forgetting someone else from last year. So
I think he was the only one. I mean, Parker Washington, I guess, opted out, but he was already out for the season with an injury. So
yeah,
that
he was
doesn't
hurt.
count.
And Utah only had one guy opt out, tight end, Dalton Kincaid. So at least I believe he was the only one. Maybe, regardless, the point is, I feel like last year, at least with the Rose Bowl, just had a little bit more meaning. I'm not just saying this because Penn State lost. I mean, maybe a little bit, but I don't know. I can't say that like I was necessarily really looking forward to today, like I was look forward to the Rose Bowl last year, and I think the opt outs had a big part of that. Obviously, heading in today, Penn State knew that they would be without Chop Robinson, their All-American defensive end. Johnny Dixon opts out, and then it was kind of expected that Kalen King and Olu Fashanu were going to probably not. If they were going to play, they weren't going to play, more than a series or two, and it came out this morning that they were out. And then even Adisa Isaac at defensive end, he was limited in how many. I think he only saw one or two series. Abdul Carter then gets hurt during the game and is limping and is really ineffective. So again, not to make excuses for Penn State because that's not really what I'm trying to do here, but just from how much juice did Penn State have going into this game? I don't think it was a whole lot. I did see a lot of people say, just like the broadcast point out that the Penn State sideline seemed to be in a malaise and Ole Miss was more hyped up for it. I mean, maybe a little bit, but that's also because Ole Miss was winning and Penn State was losing. Like, I don't necessarily, right, if people are going to say, oh, Penn State didn't care about this game or didn't go in, like, with the effort to win. I don't necessarily think, like, effort was an issue today as much as it was Penn State had, a true freshman at corner that was, getting picked on a little bit. Cam Miller was a little bit up and down. Ole Miss made a lot of good plays, and Ole Miss clearly came to win. So I think a little bit of everything can be true. I'm just saying from my perspective, I was not expecting Penn State to win this game, despite whatever the line was. Penn State was favored in this, right? Like they ended up being still the favorite. I know they opened up.
They were favored. They were 4.5 point favorite in this one.
That surprises me. I'm retired from gambling until March Madness, so I'm not fully into it. But just going into this bowl game, would have thought that Ole Miss was going to be more so the favorite. But once again, I'm not trying to make excuses for Penn State, but you're missing out. All these guys that we listed earlier, and it really takes away from Penn State. What were you? I feel like I'm rambling now. What were your thoughts on the game? What were you kind of thinking heading into it, and then as the game was unfolding?
Well, I will say when I read that, I knew Johnny Dixon had opted out, but when I read that Kalen King wasn't going to play in snaps, I definitely became more worried for the secondary against that Ole Miss passing attack, and my worst fears were realized there. With that, the only time they seem to be able to stop Ole Miss is when the pass rush was able to get home on Jackson Dart. And, it seemed like maybe they were going to knock him out of the game at one point. He was looking a bit hobbly at the beginning of his ankle, but, his Ole Miss trainers did a good job taping him up, and, his teammates did a better job of protecting him and making sure he didn't take too many bad hits after that. But because, if he got knocked out of the game, I mean, I believe their backup had already portaled out, so they would have been going to their original third stringer.
Academically ineligible, Spencer Saunders. He was the Oklahoma State kid. So it would have been Walker Howard.
Regardless, they would have been going to their original third stringer if Dart had been unable to play. And I mean, Dart obviously he's like one of the best, maybe the best player on the field today.
Once again, it's not excuses. I'm just simply like things happen, and I'm giving like part of the reason for it. Ole Miss could have won today if Penn State had all their players. I'm not saying that like, oh, if Chop Robinson and Adiza Isaac were out there for 75% of the snaps, Penn State would have won. I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying from a fan's perspective, what I was kind of expecting coming into this game, knowing that Penn State was going to be without some really, really good players, and Ole Miss certainly had the
I mean, I would have liked to see how Ole Miss would have done if four of their best players opted out of this game. I mean,
yeah, and
I think
credit to Ole
they
Miss
had one.
for
I think one
picking.
guy just opted out. So I
Yeah,
mean, it's not exactly an excuse. It's reality. I mean, if you lose your top two cornerbacks, both of who are projected to be like what, but probably in the maybe first or second round of the NFL draft.
yeah,
There's going to be a drop off. You lose Chop Robinson, one of your key edge rushers. Yeah, I know you still got Adisa Isaac and Dennis Sutton, but you're down a key rusher on the D line. And then, of course, Abdul Carter gets hurt and he's
yeah.
just ineffective afterwards. I mean, that's like your, best linebacker there getting hobbled. So, I mean, obviously it's part of the game, but it's just, it's also, again, I'm saying if shoes on the other foot, I would think, let's say if a couple of Ole Miss's receivers opted out, I think offense might look a little bit different today from
Yeah,
them.
and on that same point, if say that Penn State would have played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl or whatever bowl game is going on, because I think Georgia would have been a team that Penn State could potentially played, and Penn State had beaten Georgia is because Georgia didn't have a bunch of the really good players. I would be totally happy with that, right? I'm not saying that Ole Miss fans shouldn't celebrate this win. This was a really big win for them, and they played really, really well. It wasn't like this entire win was not because Penn State didn't have their best players. I'm not trying to say it. I'm just simply saying compared to last year in the Rose Bowl, where it felt like where Penn State was going into it with, again, I don't want to say
full
caring
strength.
more about it, but it just felt a little bit different to me. And people can say, right, they were talking on the broadcast about, how Olu Fashanu is there for his offensive lineman and he's, on the sidelines and caring, and Kalen King's there and things like that. And I'm not saying that they should have played. I truthfully don't. I mean, I would rather them play, but I don't really care. They can do whatever they want. I think it just takes something from the team and the program itself when you're saying this game's important, we need to win this, but yet, your best offensive tackle isn't playing, your best corner isn't playing, your best defensive end isn't playing, your other defensive end knows that he's going to be on a snap count. I think it can be tough to get buy-in from the team and even the coaches, to be honest with you, when you're saying that, oh, this game's super important, but yet, is it? Like, you can't scream and yell that this game's really important when you have players that aren't going to be playing in it. So it's just near 6 bowl games are just broken in total in every sense of the word. Same thing last night with Ohio State and Missouri. I mean, I guess we are changing it next year with the 12-team playoff, but just this idea that, this could have been such a fun, exciting game. And I think if Penn State has their full players, it's obviously going to be a different game as far as, how well they're able to play. And just even once again, from a fan perspective of being excited for this game, it felt very exhibition-y to me, at least on Penn State's end of things. Ole Miss obviously cared a lot, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. And it was
What do you say about this, Pat?
great win.
Ole Miss got their best pass rusher and starting offensive tackle. And yeah, I guess that kind of brings me into my point though about the offense. I think the biggest disappointment is really more so that the defense. It's kind of understandable they have some issues, but the offense. I mean, the only opt out is what Olu Fashanu, and
Yeah.
and you still, you thought maybe under the interim coordinators, Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell, they seemed like maybe they were turning the corner a bit with how they looked against Michigan State, but they just seem to take a few steps back today. Granted, the run game started out strong, and I guess you want some legit criticisms. I'd say I'm not sure what the coordinators were doing, like when early on, they were averaging over 7 yards a game on the ground. That drive ended in a field goal. They got down into the red zone, and then they proceed to throw on 2 of the next 3 plays and end up kicking a field goal, when instead they could have just maybe fed it to Nick Singleton or fed to Katron Allen. Maybe they could have ended up with a touchdown. Now, maybe long run, it wouldn't have mattered, since defense didn't seem to have much in terms of answers, but, could have at least maybe set the tone a little better to start the game. But I think they'd have a little baff. And just, and it was just disappointing to see, I don't know, Drew Howard kind of, floated some passes, and, in his best, and probably his most explosive pass play was a tip ball that just happened to land in the hands of Tyler Warren, who then, had the wherewithal to just see he had nothing but a convoy of blockers in front of him and just, damn near took it for a touchdown. It was like a 75-yard play that, got down to 5, and then Penn State punched it in. But overall it's just, and then, Bo Prabula came in, had a couple of highlight reel worthy moments, especially that pass to Nick Singleton for a touchdown. And I don't know. I think, I don't know. Do you think that Bo should have gotten a little more run midway through the game? It just felt like it wouldn't have hurt. Just with, I don't know. Drew seemed a little ineffective at times, and I know it's not all on him. The receiving core was absent for pretty much until Ole Miss decided to go into soft coverage in the last 5 minutes, and then you started seeing Trey Wallace coming up with some catches. But it was just disappointing, and frankly, and the Andy Kotelnicki era can't start soon enough. I'm really, he's got his work cut out for him, but I'm hopeful he's something of the type who can make chicken salad out of chicken. You know what?
Yeah, I mean, there's really not that much to say about the offense that hasn't been said this year, because this was basically just a replay of every single game after the West Virginia game, where Penn State was able to mostly run the ball effectively. I mean, I thought that they actually looked better than normal. Nick Singleton in particular looked particularly explosive today. But he only had 8 carries. Katron Allen only had 10 carries, and obviously that's part because Penn State found themselves trailing pretty early, but it wasn't like it was a blowout or that, I mean, it was a 2017 game going into the half. So I do think that they got a little pass happy early on, and even from Penn State's perspective, where with the way that its defense was playing, which was not that good and not able to, kind of get off the field, why just try to slow the game down, try to run the ball more, and try to do that, what they I guess kind of had been doing this entire season, where take the air out of the ball,
That's
try
funny,
to
Addison.
beat Iowa East. So
I was gonna say, it's funny. I was actually waiting for you guys I was waiting for Ole Miss to blow the game open with the way they were just carving up at secondary. So I'm a little surprised you felt that way. It felt like definitely after the first quarter, I think once Ole Miss took the lead, and it just kind of felt like a game where Penn State was going to have to put up 40 points to win the game, and I just didn't quite have the confidence in them to do so.
yeah, I don't know. You could listen to this entire conversation after the Illinois game or the Northwestern game, or so many other games this year, just because this has been a reoccurring dream over and over and over again, where it's just the only difference today was that the defense stunk as well, and that Penn State didn't have.
The next I do have to disagree. I'm not. I wouldn't say it's for sure Hour's not the guy. I'm willing to give. I want to see what Andy Kotelnicki can do with him, because he did pretty good at Kansas with a drop back passer, and who was it? Jason Bean was his name, I believe.
Mm-hmm. He's a little bit more athletic. You can be nice. You can say you're not sure he's not that guy. That's a completely ridiculous statement to make. Look around college football, and who would programs rather have it? Drew Allure went into the transfer portal. Do you know who becomes number one quarterback that everybody wants, it's gonna be Drew Lohr. So this whole like, oh, Drew Lohr is not that guy. They should be
It was
playing
the same thing with Sean Clifford. Everyone's like, "Oh, I hope Sean Clifford portals." Like, yeah, he would be the number one quarterback in the
yeah.
portal if he entered.
And I
And
was
yeah, I
not the
mean,
biggest,
same
especially
with
at
Drew
the
Lauer.
end, not the Sean Clifford guy. Eh, I mean, look at Ohio State with Kyle McCord, where Kyle McCord gets so much of the blame despite going 11-1 and very nearly almost beating Michigan. And he's goes into the portal, ends up at Syracuse for whatever reason. But in Ohio State, who would be throwing lots of money at Drew Lohr if he entered the transfer portal? I think Ohio State would be. So people you watch this Penn State team. I'm not saying that Drew Lohr doesn't like have blame, because he certainly does. He needs to be better when sensing pressure. He needs to be better with anticipating his throws. For being 6'5", everything gets knocked down. I don't know what's going on with that, but you watch this team for 13 games. It's not just Drew. It's the wide receivers can get flat out like no separation. Keandre Lambert-Smith, thanks for playing along. That was a great game. I thought that he had opted out until the third quarter. So interesting to find out that he actually did play. Trey Wallace, even his catches, he basically drops the ball. Like he has like a second of like, ooh, I'm going to drop this. Didn't make a catch in the fourth quarter. Liam Clifford did make a catch in the fourth quarter. And sure, this could be a little bit of scheme of Penn State, trying to force it to, the running backs or the tight ends. But once again, we have seen this game after game. These wide receivers were not good this year. There was no KJ Hamler. There was no Jahan Dotson. There was no Parker Washington. There was no Mitchell Tinsley. And even today, there was no Dante Cephas either. Not that he exactly would be lighting it up. But for people to put the blame on Drew, who absolutely could be better, but it is a wide receiver issue at Penn State, bar none. And the fact that they're in the transfer portal right now and sort of kind of have Julian Fleming, and that's really it, is really just a complete failure for Penn State. And I know that it's NIL this, and you don't want to upset your culture with bringing in transfers and having them make more money than other people, but Penn State just cannot go into next season with Julian Fleming being the lone guy at wide receiver and thinking that's going to help solve every issue, because
Nope.
I'm not trying to be negative, but it is super, super bleak at wide receiver, and I'm not sure that any of those guys should have the benefit of the doubt when it comes to next season, because you want to look around the country, and if you want to look at quarterbacks versus wide receivers, where is the issue lies, Penn State is squarely in those. They need way better wide receivers, and they need an upgrade at quarterback. There's not too many quarterbacks that would come in here and change anything for this Penn State season. So Drew Lohr till I die. That's all I have to say.
Well, on the subject of receivers, what do you think of Marcus Higgins? He's been kind of the Penn State Internet's whipping boy over why the receivers are bad.
Yeah.
I won't say that I'm satisfied with him by any means, but I also think it's way too early to call for him to. I don't think 1 year, especially with what he inherited, it's definitely too soon to call for him to be canned. But that being said, next year feels like a make or break year for Higgins.
Yeah.
If the room doesn't look improved next year, I think we're probably making a change at that position coach spot.
Yeah, I don't think that things should have been as bad as they were, right? It felt like Keandre Lambert-Smith, right? He comes in this season and looks better, but yet he plateaus in at some point. And I trying to bring up his stats as we speak, but it felt like, right after they were playing like Ohio State and teams like that he really, fell off, because we did over-unders heading into the season. 55 receptions for Keandre Lambert-Smith was one of them. And in October, it was like he was going to blow that out of the water. And then I don't think he ended up getting to 55 receptions. Trey Wallace obviously struggled with staying healthy this entire season. And even in this bowl game, he made that last catch and then had to, was hurt. I think he was able to walk off the field, so hopefully he's okay. But Dante Cephas from Kent State, right? He comes in, but he can't come in until the spring. So, right, my point being is that, like, there, in one sense, there is talent in that room. I don't think it's like a total like void of talent the way that some people want to make it seem. Because even like Caden Saunders was a top 100 kid. Anthony Ivy was a 4-star recruit. So there's certainly talent there to some respect. But yeah, we all knew going into the season that the wide receivers were the biggest question mark. And far and away, they did not live up to even like the low expectations that we had. So I certainly think that, Marquise Haggins deserves another year, but yeah, at some point the blame does, right. He was hired to coach wide receivers and coach them well. And if they're not going to play well, then yeah, you can't just keep using, the previous guy as the excuse. You
Agreed.
brought this up,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
how many
I think Ole Miss's receive all three of them would have probably been the top three on
Trey Harris, man.
Penn State's roster.
Yeah, and that's even the thing today, right? The Penn State secondary, wasn't as good as they normally were, but even I feel like Cam Miller was in position a lot of the times, and Ole Miss's wide receivers just like made plays on the ball, and that's what Penn State really, really missed this year from the wide receivers. The way that Sean Clifford could just throw it up to Jahan Dotson or throw it to Parker Washington or even Mitchell Tinsley and then make contested catches. There was nobody on Penn State's roster. I'm trying to think of any. Kendra Lambert Smith had the touchdown against Iowa. That was pretty impressive. Other than that, it's just really, really tough to think of like a really tough one-on-one grab that a Penn State receiver made this year. So I don't know. It's frustrating, and I feel like it's Groundhog Day, and I'm just on
Wide
here all the time.
receiver, Katron's most viral mo. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Mike. Trying to remember what game this
It's against
was.
Michigan, although there was like stop and start to it. It wasn't like he got raced down because he was sprinting as hard as he can. And also, let's
Running
congrats.
running backs are the biggest strength, I'd say. And I mean, and I'll say the one. I mean, I will give credit to Sider and Howell for coming up with ways to better spring Katron and Nick loose for some huge gains. That got noticeably better once Yurcich got fired. So I'd say running back is probably the strongest part of the offense. And I'll
Yeah,
say tight end next year. I'm not too worried about, especially with Tyler Warren announcing he's coming back. I'm feeling okay there. It's really receiver and then quarterback. They also got to see some big. Hours got to make big strides. Or it's not him, then Pope Beulah, Paxton Smolik, even Grumpmeyer, somebody. Like I said, Andy Kolonicki's got some work cut out for him. So I'm really curious to see what he's able to do going forward. Yes, what's up, Jackson? Good to see you again. On that note, just quick housekeeping things. Yes, shout out to all 43 you tuning in to watch us right now. Hope you're enjoying the show. And shout out to people in the chat: Mike Gee, Tucker Holmes, Addison Book. I see we got a few hottie toddy. It's probably Ole Miss fans. Jim R, Midwest Picker, Mark Spaniola, WMP. Yes, big game next Sunday at the Palestra for the basketball team, taking on Michigan. I will be there. Hopefully they get the dub. Clint Moses, Jermaine Mims, T. Sully, our old pal Mike Fort, Bill Kramer, Timothy Green. Welcome, all of you. Let's see. I think Mr. Green's got a take here. What's up, JJ? How you doing? I think Penn's a little bit better next year. That we'll find a way. That's coming from West Virginia fans. So just hang in there. Things will get better. Thanks, Tim, for the kind words. And congrats to your Mountaineers finishing the season strong. I know it started out with Neil Brown squirrely in the hot seat. He ends it on the Mayo seat, literally getting Mayo dumped on his head after winning the Duke's Mayo Bowl. I believe you guys are returning a lot of key players next year, so that game in Morgantown to open the year should be interesting. And before we talk about next year, actually, which is another thing Pat and I were talking about before we hit record, MarkRogersTV.com. Check us out for year-round Penn State sports coverage. We're obviously football season is just finished, but we're very much in the thick of basketball season. The Big Ten play is about to start up, full go. Wrestling season going on right now. Teams looking for their 10th national title under Cale Sanderson, a dynasty he's built there. Hockey's doing pretty decent. Got a lot of hockey coverage there too. So ain't just football, folks. We cover Penn State sports year round. So check us out there. Also, check us out at our Discord channel. talk college football all the time. You can sign up at patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV. And so I guess on that note, Pats, do you want to talk about next season right now? Because I'm seeing a lot of hot takes on how next season's going to go. And most of them think it's not going to go so well. I'm seeing a lot of, 7-5, 8-4 at best type of comments because the schedule is going to get tougher, which, well, yes, that's factually correct. Also, I feel like some of the people making those predictions didn't watch a single minute of UCLA or USC football this year because, frankly, I'd say those teams have even bigger problems right now than Penn State's had.
Yeah, I think Penn State's like mostly in. It's weird, right? Because last year they returned more starters and more depth, but yet they had the question mark of bringing in our starting first year quarterback in Drew Aller, and the questions at wide receiver, which I guess still exist. So I think it can be easy to look at oh, they're taking a step back at defensive line because you're not going to have Chop Robbins, you're gonna have Chop, and you're not going to have Adisa Isaac, and all these different spots. But I mean, Penn State still returns quite a bit of talent. Kevin Winston, I think at safety is going to be a really big player. Same with Jalen Reed at safety. Abdul Carter's obviously, I think someone that this year he was fine. I don't think he necessarily lived up to expectations, but as a third-year player next year, I think Drew will obviously get better. And as I've, have made clear on this, this podcast or post-game show, whatever we want to call it, that I do think he is, one of the better quarterbacks and will be one of the better quarterbacks in the nation. Nick Singleton back, Kentron Allen back. Like you said, Tyler Warren coming back at tight end. I think offensive line depth has been really good. So even though they're not returning necessarily the experience and the starters that they did last year, I think the talent level isn't going to drop off majorly. We'll see what happens with the transfer portal as well. Can they bring in another wide receiver or two? Can they bring in another quarterback for depth? But I'd have to take a harder look at everything that Penn State has and some of the other teams as far as like predicting a record. But I think they're going to be right in the thick of it for the playoffs, the 12-team playoffs. So I'm not greatly concerned. And just with how the expansion of conferences is happening, like this idea of 12-0 teams and things like that. Like, I'm not saying it's not realistic because I'm sure there still will be undefeated teams, but there's going to be more built-in losses into schedules just because of how difficult they're going to be. So I would say that compared to last year, right? I think Penn State was looking a little bit more upward this year. I don't necessarily think it's downward, but just a little bit more unprovenness. But again, still promise for where Penn State is at.
I mean, look, they finished with 10 wins again. I know it, and I know it's, they lost the biggest games in the schedule, so I'm not trying to say it was, raging success. I was hoping they could get a split between Ohio State and Michigan, and that didn't happen. Like, so they hit the default. I mean, you can definitely do much worse than hitting the default, and having the default be 10 wins says something about your program as a whole. Now, this isn't me making any type of prediction for next year yet. There's a whole lot that still has to happen. We got to see who's in, who's out of the portal, and also how spring ball goes, how player development goes especially with these new coordinators in place, who I will say I'm optimistic with both Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen running their respective sides of the ball. And I'm sure you feel similarly, Pat. I don't know if we talked much about this since I think the Kotelnicki hire was made. I think it was made after we did our Michigan State postgame, which I don't actually, it was Lando who was on it, but that hire was made after the Michigan State postgame. So I don't think we've talked much about the coordinators yet, but yeah, how are you feeling about, with the new coordinators, is your level of you're more optimistic about the offense and defense next year, or about the same?
Love the Kotelnicki hire. He was, after I did a whole bit of research, I wrote like 3,000 words on potential offense coordinators. I liked him. I liked Kirby Moore at Missouri, and I liked Colin Klein at Kansas State. So Not that those were the only 3 guys I would have been happy with, but those were kind of the 3 that I picked out, and I was like, I feel like these make realistic sense just because like Joe Brady, for example, became the Bills offensive coordinator, and he's a shocker. Joe Brady is pretty good at the whole offensive play calling thing. It turns out that it was not just Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, because he's doing great things with the Bills since he's taken over. But besides the point, I like those 3 guys and was happy when Kaepernick ended up being the hire. I just like that he's done it in different ways, right? With Buffalo and I believe his name is Jared Patterson, the running back. I know he had a brother that was a linebacker, so maybe I'm speaking of the linebacker. But either way, at Buffalo, he showed that they can rely heavily on the run. He's shown that they can rely more heavily on the pass and can kind of do a bunch of different things. Actually, earlier this year, Kansas and Kansas State played. Kansas had to play their third string quarterback, who was a true freshman walk on. You would have thought that this kid was a 5th-year, senior quarterback, the way that he was able to, move the ball down the field. And I think Kaepernick deserves a lot of credit for, his game planning and schemes and just outlook on offense. So absolutely love the Kaepernick hire and think that'll be, really good for Penn State. Tom Allen, I'm a little, whatever about. I think when the first thing you have to mention about the hire is, oh, well, he was really good like 7 years ago. That always makes me a little concerned when the game has changed and continually changes so much. I do understand the Peter principle of, no longer a head coach can just focus on defense, and that'll help. Tom Allen would not have been too high on my list as far as defense coordinators go. But once again, I think Penn State is just like that talent. The talent level on the defense is so good that it really shouldn't matter who the defense coordinator is in some sense, as long as they're not, a complete, liability. But I think Penn State, the defense will still have so many just flat out dudes that it shouldn't make too much of a difference. So all in all, really happy with Kaepernick. Defensively, I think that you were never going to get an improvement on Manny Diaz, and really an improvement on defense in general. I mean, the defense is just so good this year that it's kind of would be unfair to expect Allen to take them to another level. But if he can just, keep them around the same, then that's going to be a net win for Penn State. So what did you think of the hires?
Well, before I get to that, I just want to respond to Clint here. Committed to mention Washington or Oregon, year 2, or Wisconsin, Nebraska, hell, Michigan State. Okay. First of all, okay, Washington, they're losing almost all their key players, and it's at Beaver Stadium next year. Now, I know they got Will Rogers, the quarterback transfer from Mississippi State, and he's good, but I mean, are you expecting him to be Michael Penix Jr.? That's, again, I'm not predicting how that game's going to go, but to just chalk it up as a surefire loss, that's crazy. Now, Oregon, they'll be tough, but they don't play them until 2025. Wisconsin, I mean, come on. Did you watch Wisconsin this year? They're still very much a work in progress. And, even though the game's in Madison, I'm not too worried about that one. I mean, Penn State's beaten them like the last 5 straight or something like that. Nebraska, same thing. I don't think they play Nebraska next year, but, they're very much a work in progress. And come on, Michigan State, yeah. Jonathan Smith was a great hire, but that's also going to take some time. Northwestern, great story with David Braun and them, but I mean, Penn State just whooped them this year. And I mean, what, you think they're going to come? I don't even think Penn State plays them next year anyway, but if they did, I'd still expect Penn State to win.
So you're talking about the 2024 schedule, Clint,
yeah,
not the Big Ten in general, which, yeah, I mean, the tough part of the schedule next year, which is funny because Penn State also doesn't have Michigan. So it's Illinois at home, UCLA at home, at USC, at Wisconsin with a bye in between those 2 games, home against Ohio State, home against Washington, and then at Purdue, at Minnesota, and home against Maryland. So, yeah, I mean, it's obviously tougher than I think it necessarily has been in past years, but that's, it's weird, right? So you no longer just have this Ohio State, Michigan. Those are the only 2 games that matters. So it does kind of like change the calculus. It's just, yeah, like what is Washington going to be next year? Like I think Kellen DeBoer is a really, really good coach. So I would not be shocked if Washington, is still a top, 20, top 15, maybe even top 10 team. But I don't necessarily think that's the expectation. It's not like in Ohio State or Michigan the last 3 years where it's like, oh, guarantee going to be a top 10 team. And even Ohio State, it seems like they might be swinging and missing when it comes to quarterback, because they kind of, whatever the story is, whether they push Kyle McCord out or Kyle McCord wanted more of a guarantee, right? Whatever that situation was, I think Ohio State is, when we were talking earlier about what direction is Penn State trending in, I think it's pretty clear that Ohio State is trending in a negative direction. Although we'll see what happens with some of their NFL guys if they decide to come back for another year. And like Tim was saying earlier, I mean, UCLA is not in a great spot. USC, I think they made some good hires, but once again, they're a team that, I wouldn't say
I think some people are putting a little too much stock into that bowl win.
Yeah.
I know Notre loss looked good, but I mean, it's you're talking about Louisville,
and who would have thought that USC this year was going to go, 7-5 to begin with Caleb Williams. So, not that, maybe they're better than 7-5 next year, but I think that, USC, the brand, is a lot different than what USC, the program, has been for a little while. So I don't know. The schedule is obviously tougher. I'm definitely saying that it's not, but I don't think it's as tough as it has been. I will just say that stretch of UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington, that is a pretty tough, 5-game stretch, where in the past, Penn State maybe has had really tough 3-game stretches where they had to do something like, go to Nebraska, home against Ohio State, then play, Michigan State or something. So a lot can change between now and, September, October, November. So we'll wait and see.
And we'll know, we'll also have some idea what the team is by the end of September as you get into that stretch. And again, I guess it brings back, we got a whole off season ahead of us. We got see what's going to happen with the portal. Obviously, some guys are going to leave Penn State who see the writing on the wall, aren't going to see the field much. And then they're going to bring in some guys, to help fill in some gaps.
Hopefully.
Especially
at snail's pace right now, Tim.
Well, I mean, there's the next wave of transfers that are going to be coming through after all the bowl games. So
only 3 days, though. They have to, I believe it's January 2nd is the deadline. They moved it up this year. So it's not as I know people have been saying that there's going to be another wave, and I do think obviously you're going to have a couple trickle out, but I
still expect to hear some news in the coming weeks about some transfers.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just going to be the fact that it will have to have been people that are already in the portal, because I'm pretty sure January.
Yeah, maybe there's people. I'm sure maybe there's people they've been talking to right now that are maybe even have some kind of silent verbal or something, but they're going to announce at a later date. I feel like that's how it works with some of these people in the portal, at least.
Yeah, no, it opens back up for visits after the new year. Just right now, I wouldn't say it's trending in a great direction, and sort of where Penn State, specifically at wide receiver, where Penn State has been putting some of their resources and not putting others. It seems like that they are happier with, guys like Trey Wallace than maybe the fan base is, which maybe it helps, maybe it hurts them. I don't necessarily know for sure, but like Penn State was not as active as like a Notre Dame was. Notre Dame, I believe, already has 2 transfer wide receivers committed, one of which is Chris Mitchell. His brother, John Mitchell, is committed to Penn State as a cornerback from high school. It just seems like Penn State was a little, like we are only looking for like super top tier rather than total turnover. So I don't know. James has made very clear that he's not a big fan of the transfer portal, and I get that in a sense, because you kind of live by as much as you can live by the transfer portal, you can die by it as well. There's a reason that schools like Ole Miss and Oregon and these other ones also tend to lose a lot of guys, because if you're bringing guys in, that means that guys are going to be more likely to leave too, which is a double-edged sword. But I don't know. I am hopeful for next year, and hopeful that there are going to be some moves made in January that Penn State can get some help, specifically at wide receiver and maybe even at cornerback. But it was not the most fruitful of Decembers as far as transfer portal goes for Penn State. Although we'll see what happens with Julian Fleming, who will not publicly commit to Penn State despite probably getting a car from Penn State. And he's ruining my Twitter engagements because I have so many coming home videos just waiting to be released to him. And he won't he won't get it. So.
I mean, you do see the Blaze Alexander logo clearly on the truck he just bought, which, is Blaze Alexander's a sponsor of Penn State Athletics. It's a local car dealership. So if that doesn't scream he's coming to Penn State, then I don't know what does. I mean, it's like I said, he'll probably just show up to class when spring semester starts, and that'll be that.
Tim, we're going to take 5 seconds here. We're going to be silent, and that's going to be us giving Ole Miss credit. All right? And go. Credit to Ole Miss. Glad that we could give credit to them. They shredded Penn State's defense. They are better than Penn State's defense. Honestly, Ole Miss should – I don't know how they weren't in the playoff. They were so great. I think that Mark Emmert should rise from the dead, and he should demand that Ole Miss gets put in the playoff because they are the best. Thank you, Ole Miss. So glad we could play them.
Well, they could be a playoff team next year, given all
they should be. I had them.
Who they got out of the portal.
Tim, not only do I have Ole Miss number 1 in my college football rankings for next year, I have them number 1 in my NFL rankings because they were just that great. Great job, Ole Miss. If you can tell, I'm very ornery today. I don't know why. Very angry and mad, upset.
But yeah, you wanted my opinion on the
crybaby.
Allen hires.
We just gave Ole Miss credit. How am I crying? That's the opposite of crying. All right,
I was saying, well, yeah, you asked me what I thought about the Kotelnicki and Allen hires. I like them both. I mean, especially the Kotelnicki hire. I mean, he seems like it kind of seems like a guy. It reminds me of the Joe Moorhead hire. It's a guy who's, I think his style of offense is what's hip, what's relevant. Like the guy just knows how to get the most out of whatever talent he's worked with, whether it's at Kansas, was at Buffalo, or was that Wisconsin Whitewater before that, which was a D3 powerhouse when he was there with Lance Leipold. But and he'll be working with level of talent he's never had at his previous stops. So I'm curious to see like how he, maybe he can find ways to refine Drew's game. Get him some throws that can boost his confidence and get him more into a rhythm. And of course, the important thing is too, they got to maybe get some receiver. Maybe there's a couple of guys in the roster already. They got Julian Fleming coming in. Maybe got to grab another guy or two out of the port. But hopefully find some way to scheme guys open. And that's kind of how his that's kind of seems like his MO. So I'm really curious to see what does there. Tom Allen. It seems to me Franklin wanted a guy, if possible, who had previous head coaching experience, who also plays an aggressive style, which, Tom Allen fits the bill there. And, it certainly helps that he's a guy who is well liked by his Indiana players as head coach. And I think he'll be well liked by the Penn State players that he works with. And, I think the fact that he just has to focus on coordinating a defense and not having to run a program will help for him. It seemed like he was maybe a bit in over his head when it came to having to run a program. And he's also got he's going to have more talent than he has ever worked with before, just like with Kotelnicki. So, yeah, thanks for getting rid of that troll, Pat.
Can we not just like light up the comments just complaining? Like, come on, guys, we're just joking around here.
Yeah, and so I'm a fan of it. So I think obviously you're losing some. I won't expect next year's defense to be elite. I mean, to expect any next year's defense to be like this year's was, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. But
that's what makes it so painful. It's that they had, just at defensive end, Chuck Robinson, who's going to be a first round pick, Adisa Isaac, who I think very well could end up being a day two guy, which is really impressive for where if he would have entered last year, maybe a 5th or 6th rounder or something like that. So has really worked his way.
I think he might be a day one guy. I've seen him projected in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, he was really, really, really good this year and took major steps. And he's a guy that I don't think it was ever confirmed, but tore his Achilles, I want to say, heading into the 2021 season. So last year is kind of his working his way back here, and this year you kind of saw him put everything together. So just the talent they had at defensive end and, good linebacker play, strong secondary throughout this entire season. The fact that they had such that, an elite defense and you have, your 5-star quarterback coming in and, a strong offensive line with maybe the best left tackle that the program has ever seen. Just sucks that they, you know,
I
couldn't.
mean, this was unfortunately a waste of they did waste a elite defense.
Yeah.
If the offense was up to snuff, yeah, this could have been a special season. So unfortunately, that's kind of going to be the story of when you look back on a 2023 team. That's that's kind of going to be the
Yeah.
theme.
But you never know, right? Like you look at Penn State heading into the 2016 season, and who would have thought that they would have won the Big Ten? And then you look at them heading into the 2017 season. That's what everyone back
Had
then we thought that
expectation, yeah.
was the year, and just small little plays, right? Like against Ohio State in 2016, you blocked that field goal, and it changed your season. In 2017, you have a 15-point lead on Ohio State, and you can't close it out. So sometimes
Well,
the difference
I feel like Penn State's best seasons happen when the expectations are lower.
Yeah.
Like 2022, like last year,
Yeah.
The expectations were pretty mid overall. I mean, even I said 9-3. They end up surprising us. They go 10-2. They win the Rose Bowl.
Even
beat a good Utah
2019.
team.
Strong
Yeah,
clip from
actually, I was
first
going to say
season.
2019.
I
was
believe
better than
Penn State was
expected.
ranked heading into the year, but it wasn't like this is a guaranteed top 10 team type thing, and they go out and they run undefeated going into November. They were number 4 in the playoff for the first rankings, and ended up losing that crazy game to Minnesota. And then Ohio State was really good that year; they deserved to win. But yeah, you just never know with college football, and kind of I'll say the beauty with Penn State is that it's every single season, it's like the same amount of, I don't want to say the same amount of talent, but just the way that James Franklin has recruited, where their blue chip ratio is always at, 55 to 60%. And I want to say next year is the highest amount of blue chips that they've had on the roster since Franklin's arrival. So
See,
we'll
this
see
is
what
where I get
happens.
annoyed with comments that say nobody does more with less than Franklin. Like, I think he's doing exactly what you'd expect with the
Yeah,
level
it's
they
about the
recruit
same.
at.
You would like to, right, the same way that they have had seasons that they have not met expectations, right? 2021.
Right. I mean, 2020, obviously the COVID, which, as you
It
say,
didn't
never
happen
happened.
to what you're
The
speaking.
2021, that was, that's one, but like overall, I mean, with the level they recruit at, you'd expect like default any given year to be 9 wins.
Yeah. They basically are what the recruiting rankings say that they should be, which is a top 15-ish team. You would just hope that they would like get a little lucky one of these years with Ohio State and Michigan, but it is what it is.
Yes, agreed, Tim. That's what makes it exciting and why we all love this dumb sport of college football. And we got a hot take incoming, Pat.
Oh, yeah, shouldn't count in the final rankings. Yeah, I mean, I don't like totally disagree with that. I mean, the final rankings don't really matter for anything anyway. Like it's not like Penn State won today changes anything drastically like within the program. Like I was seeing people, obviously like the melodramatic Penn State Twitter today being like, any recruit that's watching this game has to hate Penn State. It's like, did they watch the first 12 games? Like this was, I think they know what they're signing up for. This was not any different. And I don't think, greatly matters in the grand scheme of things. The same way that, right, last year, Penn State beat Utah in the Rose Bowl when we were all like, woo, yeah, this is the best thing in the world. This catapults us. And
This
then
season's ruined. I mean, it's been that way for a
it's
while,
broken for
Dion.
sure. Yeah. It's definitely, it's not what it used to be. Like and granted, like I think back to like, even like that, remember like the bowl game against LSU? What was it? The 2009 season? I think it was the 2010. I think it was the Capital One Bowl. It was Daryl Clark's last game.
The 2010 Capital One. Yeah, the
like
rainy
that
one
game,
with LSU. Yeah.
And maybe it's just I was in high school for that, so I was younger, but like that game felt like so much more important and like dire. And like I remember wanting to win that game so badly that I just haven't felt about even the Rose Bowl. Like I just haven't felt that way in a while for Penn State and bowl games. So I don't know that's necessarily just because I was more of a kid back then, and now I'm an adult, and I am
Hmm.
not going to live and die with a bowl game. But yeah, bowl games certainly not what they used to be.
Yes, I do agree, Clint. Silver lining is sometimes finding a star player for next year that's been on the bench. Or, you see guys maybe who didn't do much all year because they were riding the bench, step up and come up with big games. So you saw with Miller Moss at USC. But of course, not that of course, then also what happens is the fans, of course, they get all excited. They think that's how that guy's going to perform all next season long. And then that doesn't end up being the case. So I always say this, like, don't put too much stock into a bowl game, win or lose. Don't put too much stock and don't use that to project how next year is going to go. Like, just kind of look at it as like a one-off. Like, yeah, like
In the big picture, small picture, you can absolutely go bonkers with it. I completely understand.
well, yeah, we're talking big picture. Big picture, be very careful using bowl games to project how the future is going to be.
But Ole Miss fans today, by all means, yeah, talk that good, and yeah, you can. There's
Oh
no,
no, they should enjoy the hell out of it. I mean, we'd be enjoying the hell
that's
out
the
of it.
beauty. There's
Penn
no
State had won.
repercussions for anything they say today. That was the beauty with Penn State last year. It's like,
Let the
oh,
hottie toddies fly.
we should be in the playoff. Same thing at Penn State. If Penn State would have been USC in the Rose Bowl and in the 2016 season, the 2017 Rose Bowl, we would have had so much ammunition with no repercussions. We absolutely would have been like, we should have been in the playoff. We're better than Washington, blah, blah. So, no, by all means. But yeah, big picture wise, doesn't mean doesn't always mean what fans think it means, unfortunately.
Yeah, Tim, I don't know why Oregon State, Washington State didn't land at a power conference program. That I really think they deserve to continue to be power conference programs. Definitely getting screwed in the process, but that's not our wheelhouse. I'm sure we got some Oregon. Actually, Clint, I'm sure, can chime in on this. He's got a Oregon State Beaver logo in his avatar. But yeah, I do feel sorry for Oregon State and Washington State fans. I really hope their programs don't suffer as a result of this. I know they've got some deal worked out with the Mountain West where they're not joining the conference, at least not for football. I think maybe for basketball and other sports.
Yeah.
But for football, they have an agreement. I think I guess their de facto independence.
Or I actually think sorry not to cut you off, but for basketball, I think they're joining the WCC, the West Coast Conference, Gonzaga.
Gonzaga. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, at least maybe they'll give. There's been rumors about Gonzaga going. I know we're getting to basketball now, but I know there's been rumors about Gonzaga going to the Big 12, maybe. Which, because WCC just hasn't been challenging for them, really, at this point. Like they're like men amongst boys, but not to derail us into a college hoops discussion, but so yeah, we're almost an hour in. I think we're kind of ready to put a bow on this 2023 season. But Pat, any final thoughts as we head into the off season?
College football is nothing but, and sports in general, we're just simply wasting our time with all this. It's very, very funny. And one of the beauties, and I will say this, like one of the beauties of college football, at least like back in the day, and maybe I guess still a little bit now, is like the idea that, yes, of course there is, you have your one national champion and they end the year happy, but there was like a sense of like there were multiple teams that you could end your year happy, right? You could go, 8-4 and win the Capital One Bowl against LSU or Tennessee or whoever, and it was different. And maybe that is like still the case. Like Missouri fans probably really happy. Ole Miss fans obviously really happy, but for Penn State fans, it's simply just turned into just sadness when every season ends. And this year, just I really thought that this was going to be the year for Penn State to kind of make that breakthrough. And as I wrote about in my write up today, not like greatly care about like this game in general. It's just more of like when you look at the big picture and everything that comes into this game, just the fact that Penn State was in the situation of ending the season against an Ole Miss team that basically ran into the same situation that Penn State does, where they couldn't get over the two big humps on their schedule, and then Penn State has these opt-outs, and it's like this ho hum whatever game in Who Cares Bowl. Like it just stinks. And as much as I like dislike the 12-team playoff, I guess in some sense, like as it's coming closer and closer, and being a Penn State fan, I guess it does kind of change things. And we'll be excited for next year. I don't know. This was a tough year, and I don't wish Penn State fandom on anyone else because it can be tough. It can be tough. What were your thoughts on the final on the season, Tim?
Well, just we all like you had big expectations this year. Was really I said 11-1 in my preseason prediction, and I was of course do the math. I thought we get a split between Ohio State and Michigan.
Yeah,
that didn't happen, and I think not just the fact they lost the game, but the way they lost those games. I mean, the defense in both those games absolutely did enough to win the game. The offense just crapped the bed big time. Just whether it was Drew Howard just getting pressured and baited into making bad throws, or just receivers not being completely absent. The tight ends having to do everything in the passing game, and just just the inability to get explosive run plays up until like the last couple games of the year when after Yurcich got fired. It was just really, that was probably the most disappointing thing to me was just, I thought the offense would look a lot more competent in the biggest games. And if they had just been serviceable enough, I think they could have gotten a split between, they probably could have beaten Ohio State, maybe. Not sure about Michigan, but
it just offensively was not even in games of like Illinois and Iowa and Maryland, and I guess Maryland wasn't that bad, but just even in the non-Ohio State Michigan games, like this wasn't a fun offense to watch.
Yeah, even those wins, I mean, it wasn't aesthetically pleasing.
No.
Like the only aesthetically pleasing win I can think of is Michigan State. Yeah. And maybe Maryland. I mean,
Maryland wasn't too bad.
Maryland and Michigan State were probably the only aesthetically pleasing wins.
West Virginia.
I'll say West Virginia, yeah. Remember when Drew threw that bomb to Kendall Smith and we thought to ourselves how explosive this team was going to be? And
little did we know that was
the peak of the season.
We thought we were going out when we didn't realize it's like, oh no, it's all downhill from here. That was the absolute peak. So,
I mean, okay, Iowa was fun too. I mean,
yeah, we're saying offensively,
yeah.
The defense was
great. Oh yeah,
effort.
I mean that Iowa beatdown. That was fun. Just just given all some of the bad blood from the previous meeting, that was kind of satisfying. But overall, though, it was just again, it wasn't a disaster, but just disappointing. It's a real what could have been if the offense had been serviceable enough. This could have potentially, could have been a playoff team. I don't know. And again, I'm not sure. It's clear 11-1 without a Big Ten title would not have gotten us in. But even if that's the case, like 11-1, okay, yeah, that was good. Even if like they lost the New Year's Six bowl game, like still, you're at least you would have gotten a win against Ohio State or Michigan in that process, so it wouldn't have felt like a total letdown, which is kind of how it feels right now.
Yeah. No, that's the.
And it sounds a little silly that I'm maybe like complaining this much about a 10-win season. Like I'd say 90% of fan bases would kill to win that many games. But just given what the expectations were, though, it does feel like a letdown.
Yeah.
So
I don't think, and that's part of fandom is like whether we should have had those expectations or not. That's kind of what it was, and like at some point, like you reach the level of Penn State has been doing this for since the 2016 season. Basically, I mean every season after that, there's been expectations of winning the Big Ten, and when you don't reach those, like it's going to be annoying which is what it is. That's how I best describe this season and even like today's game. Like just like annoyed by the whole thing of like having to watch it basically. Like it was just frustrating. Here we are. And you know what, Tim? We'll be back here next year. They'll probably okay, I want to say probably, but Stupid Penn State will go out, they'll get a big win at West Virginia, and we'll talk ourselves right back into it. And this is simply the life we chose. So we'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back. And we might be back sooner than that, maybe with a spring game preview in April. And yeah, in the meantime, unfortunately, as you may know, the Penn State college Voice of College Football channel went away last summer. Otherwise, we may be more tempted to make some one-off videos for that channel. But in the interim between now and the blue-white game, if there's any big news regarding Penn State, perhaps you may see Pat or I hop on one of Mark's Big Ten live shows during the week. I don't know if he's doing his Monday Big Ten live shows in the off season, but I'm sure some live show there'll be a chance for one of us to jump on if there's big Penn State news to discuss. But we'll probably shoot to do maybe either a pre-blue white game or a post-blue white game show on here. So that would be our next show specifically between the two of us. Otherwise, we will see you all in about 8 months after the conclusion of the Penn State West Virginia game. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Whether you started today or if you were doing it all season long, or if you've been watching us for the past couple of years, really appreciate your viewership, appreciate your engagement in the comments. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and we look forward to talking some more college football with you next season. Happy New Year. Hope you all have a pleasant and safe 2024.